So caging results are up. Response rate is up 7% in June over last year. I should say over even last year, since we know June of last year did very well. And the same increase in average gift we've been seeing by and large. April and May were a little bit, March also were a little bit unusual, but we've been consistently up 6%. It's changed a little bit since we were up over last year, which was up, but good to see progress here. So up 16% in June, year over year, which is exciting to see. And I hope your programs are doing likewise. Any questions on the caging results? Okay. Couple of digital notes. We're seeing that we're having more competition re-enter the advertising space. So cost per clicks are going up. A lot of the increase that we're seeing is strategy related. The COVID bump kind of is what it is. It's plateaued on the digital side of things, but we are seeing some increases due to changing things around. One in particular, so Google cost per click and cost to acquire has been going up. And so people who are using Google more exclusively are getting desperate. One thing that we're noticing for a couple of clients are other organizations using your brand name in ad headlines, which is against Google policy. I know a number of years ago, I was trying to place ads and they wouldn't allow me to put the term Olympic in the ad name. Now, I was advertising for the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee, so we were able to get permission, but they tend to be very strict about those sorts of trademarks. Because Google's costs are going up, Bing is a beacon of hope. There's not as many people on there, and so there's a higher return on ad spend. So one client that we have for CDR is finding that Bing's return on ad spend is $4 to $5 for every ad spend dollar spent. And a CDR client found that they had more revenue last month from Bing than from Google, even though they spent $30,000 less on Bing because of this change in ad spend. Now, Bing, obviously, not as much scalability as Google has, not as much of an audience, but because more people are ignoring it, that's an opportunity for us to be able to jump in. Fidelity Charitable did a study of women in giving. As you might guess, from it being from Fidelity Charitable, it tended to be higher level givers. So these are $1,000 plus givers, not necessarily to the same organization. But the thing that's interesting about this study is they surveyed people in March of last year and then January of this year, which is two different worlds. And so it's interesting to see the insights. Women still lead men in giving across almost all vehicles. There's one exception that I'll talk about later on. But we saw during the pandemic that gap is narrowing. Men were more likely to say that they gave more in 2020 than, and women were more likely to say they gave less in 2020. Now, the overall trend is still everyone's giving more in 2020. But this was a bit interesting to see and to hope that men are getting their act together and in the game. I should specify here that I'm using their terms. Ideally, perhaps we wouldn't be referring to this as a binary, but you go where the research is. The one area that is male skewing is in charitable investment strategies, impact investing, microloans, and contributing to businesses. Those skew a little bit more male, but also not traditional philanthropy. So it's interesting to see that dichotomy there. There's a specific note that they had among younger women is that the pandemic helped make charitable giving a greater priority in life. Now, we on this call know that this is largely because younger people have greater to go in terms of charitable giving. Those who are older members of the population are more likely to already be giving and giving significantly. But it is good to see that people are saying that the pandemic has opened their eyes to this as a priority in their life. And hopefully that's something that they carry through with them. There were some differences in what people give to, men versus women. And the biggest skews are women were more likely to give to gender inequality, arts and culture, and what I would call basic needs, shelter, hunger, and basic health. Although men, interesting, clean water and sanitation was over on their side. Economic development, higher education, and disease were more male causes. So interesting to see. Some of this we already knew from things like University of Indiana's School of Philanthropy is very good if you want to delve deeper into gender differences in giving. They have some great reports there, but it's good to see that it's holding true and that it's being operationalized. So the Given USA report came out, and individuals still the lion's share of charitable giving. We're getting more than 2/3 of all charitable revenues come from the generosity of individuals. Individual giving is still increasing at about the same rate as giving overall. Foundations made the greatest leap last year. After all, if you're going to be giving to a foundation or from a foundation, 2020 was the year to be doing it, where there was the greatest need across these sorts of things. Bequests, they didn't say this per se, but my guess is that part of this is there was greater than average mortality last year. And so even though bequests can't be predicted, when you see greater mortality, you will see greater bequest giving. And corporate giving was the one area that dropped last year. A lot of corporations, as you might guess, had to pull back. You know, you weren't going to get a lot of sponsorships from the travel industry last year. Among recipients, arts, culture, and humanities were the organizations that were hardest hit by the pandemic. Health organizations had a little bit of a drop, but every other sector, by and large, was up year over year in terms of individual giving. And then in terms of where that money goes, the number one with 28% of giving is still religion, followed by education and human services. Giving to foundations is number 4. We're seeing that grow and grow, and I'll be interested to see if DAF giving, donor advised fund giving, starts to make a show in this figure as we go forward a bit more. Our, I believe, final benchmark, I know there's a lot of benchmarking to get through, but wanted to cover those that just came out. The fundraising effectiveness project came out for first quarter. Now remember that the fundraising effectiveness project skews smaller than a lot of the charities on this call. It's $5,000 in revenue up to 25 million. So some larger organizations in there, but you can see that it's $2 billion spread out over almost 10,000 organizations. So you can kind of do the math there to see where the average organization is. Things are looking up in Q1. There was a 10% year-over-year change in donors and a 6% increase in giving. Interestingly, this would mean that average gift is going down for organizations because 10% more donors, 6% more dollars, there has to be some sort of negative 4%-ish in average gift, although they don't tease that out. My guess is that part of that is the shift over to monthly giving, and we'll talk a little bit about that more in a second. So last year's donors, thank goodness, are renewing. There was a 3% increase in new donors coming in, but a 34% increase in new retained donors. And that's largely because we had an influx of donors last year. But retention is up overall among new donors. So 13.6% of the donors that gave in 2020 already gave in Q1 of this year. That's an increase over last year, which is really good to see. Now, this will, I'm sorry, I misstated that. It's not that 13% of last year's donors have given so far this year. 8% of those who gave last year have already given this year. That's a 13.6% year-over-year increase. So 2020, that number was about 4%. I'm sorry, 7%. Now it's about 8%. My apologies for getting that mixed up. So good news that new donor retention rate is on the rise. Good news that repeat donor retention rate is on the rise. We're retaining 24% of those multi-year donors in Q1 already. Recapture rate is down only because there was a historic recapture rate last year, which is good to see people coming back into philanthropy. So a drop is not unexpected there. So with new donor retention rate going up and repeat donor retention rate going up, you might expect that overall retention will probably go up this year. This is not likely to hold. Retention rates tend to decline throughout the year. Q1 is generally the best as more and more people go into monthly giving. Obviously, if someone made a monthly gift on December 2020, and then also on January 2021, they're counted as being retained for that year. So you can see that last year we had this greater retention in the beginning of the year that began to fall off. This year, it's a fairly gradual year-over-year change, and that's likely going to fall. And the big reason for this is we have more new donors. It's not a bad thing. New donor retention could go up, repeat donor retention go up, and the overall retention rate still go down because the mix in our files have changed. And that is the cloud that goes along with the large silver lining that comes with new donors. You'll have a lower retention rate in the coming year. But it is a slight cloud nonetheless. All of the growth was among people giving $500 or less. Larger donors fell off year over year. Any questions on any of the benchmarking? I kind of flew through that because it's a lot of numbers, can get fairly boring, but it does show a fairly rosy picture going forward with some slight changes. Slight caveats, I mean. Okay, talking a little bit about connected TV, there's been some, and I'm going to use scare quotes around this, thought leadership around connected TV recently, and wanted to kind of give some context for that because there's also been some new data out from Nielsen et al. So Nielsen, in looking and projecting out where people are spending their time, are talking about the death of TV and the death of linear TV. And yes, you have this increase among digital technologies and a decrease among traditional media, and TV is decreasing, but it is still the #1 medium that people are engaging with, twice any other area of people spending media other than other connected devices, which is a bunch of kind of a catch-all phrase. So even in 2023, we'll be spending on average almost 3 hours watching TV at that time. So looking at the TV breakdown, Nielsen just started tracking streaming technology, so we have a good snapshot of what type of TV people are watching. 64% of it is either cable or broadcast, and 26% of it is streaming. 9% is other, unsure exactly what that is. So there was a study out just yesterday, and people were talking about, oh, it's the death of linear TV, and it turned out the survey was just among people who own smart TVs with free streaming services built into them. And it's like, well, yes, among those people who don't have to pay for TV, I would imagine that linear TV is not as popular. But among the general population, almost 2/3 of folks are still watching linear TV, whether that's live or that's time shifted. You know, you have your DVR, you've recorded something, and you go back to that. Of that streaming time, most of it is subscription based. It's your Netflixes, your Disney Pluses, your Prime Video, those sorts of things that are not ad supported. Disney Plus is in there. So ad-based TV, the type that you can address through connected TV, is a small portion of that market. And people are using fewer streaming video services. Now, this is a very small fall off, but it's the first time that there's ever been a fall off in the number of streaming services used by Americans. So from 7.2 to essentially 7.1 in April. This is likely ends of trials. It's consolidation. A lot of these streaming services are likely going to be combining, as corporations do right now. But all of this means that When people talk about connected TV and the ability to address individuals, it's important. It's the one way that you can make TV into this addressable media, but it's important to put it into context that TV is a plurality, but still a minority of the time that people spend with media. That streaming services are a minority of TV, and that streaming services that you can get ad placement on are a minority of streaming services. So you're looking at a minority of a minority of a minority, which means that it's good for targeting individual people, not as good for the type of scalable solutions. And so for those who have read our white paper, this will be a bit of a review, but we talk about a trifecta of things working together. Linear TV, kind of that traditional TV that gets you scope and effectiveness when you're doing DRTV. Connected TV, to give some perspective, last year advertisers spent $60 billion on linear TV and about $8 billion on connected TV. A large part of that is cost-based. Connected TV is $20 to $25 per thousand impressions. Linear TV is $5 to $8 per thousand impressions. Connected TV gives the ability to hone in on an individual person with unparalleled depth. So that targeting, you want to go after your lapsed donors, you want to go after your one-time donors, you can target those people minutely, which is a really great way of building up revenues and building up awareness. We find that a lot of that may not happen as a transaction based on connected TV, but if someone's getting the ad, they're more likely to respond to that email, to that mail piece, all of those sorts of things. And then PSAs are really good for amplification. There can't be a direct ask in them, but it can build that top of funnel awareness that makes both linear TV and connected TV more effective. And so for a small investment in PSAs, you can help stretch linear TV and connected TV, which tend to be more expensive services because those are running with no additional marginal cost. Any questions? Okay. A fun or a rather interesting study out of China. There were all of these memes back when the pandemic was coming up that nature is healing. You know, you're seeing dolphins in the East River, or those sorts of things. And so this did actually happen during the pandemic. So in China, historically has been some of the worst areas for urban pollution. Over the past 4 years, it's decreased 8% in the big cities, which was a big accomplishment. But some cities had air pollution reductions during COVID of 25%. And so economists were asking, is clean air an experience good? And what an experience good is that it's really tough to evaluate whether a product or service is that before you have it. You know, if you buy something off of Amazon that you've bought before, you know what it is. You just need more laundry soap. Bought that today myself. So you get that laundry soap. It's not an experience good. You know what that experience is going to be like. Things like restaurants or medicine or this presentation, we chose to spend time here today, not necessarily knowing how good it was going to be. You have some guides to how good it might have been from previous ones or reputation or those sorts of things, but you really have to experience it to know. So the question they had is clean air an experience good? Once you know what the sky can look like when it's blue instead of smoke colored, do you want it again? And so what they found was that in these Chinese cities that experienced 25% drops in pollution, the cities that had the biggest drops during COVID had increased discussions about environmental protection after, and their cities had increased green subsidies in the post-COVID stimulus plans versus those that didn't have the same sort of drops. So we can say that a clean environment is this type of experience good that once you know how good it can be, then you're more likely to want that going forward. So the tough part is, as we're talking about these sorts of things, as we're talking about so many of the things that we do are experience goods. A donation, you're not necessarily going to know. You're trusting the organization that they're going to do something good of it, and you don't know necessarily what type of experience you're going to have post-donation. So how do you stimulate, how do you tell someone that what that experience is going to be like? And there's kind of a magic word of imagine for donors. So there was a great study that said, what happens if you start off a letter that says, imagine that you're a refugee fleeing persecution in a war-torn area? And this was specific to the Syria conflict. And when people were asked to imagine that they were a refugee before asked their political opinion about things, they were less likely to want to discriminate against Muslims in immigration. It was true across the political spectrum. And in fact, whether or not you got that phrase was more predictive of what your views on immigration were going to be than your political affiliation. So this sort of priming, this imagining, because you're going through the thought process of I'm putting myself into someone else's shoes, which triggers empathy, is more important than partisan ideology, which is pretty powerful in this day and age, considering how powerful partisan ideology is. This also works for donations. At my last job, we tested this with an international relief charity, and I'm able to share this because we put it out on the blog at the time. They started an email with this phrase, this imagine phrase, the same one from the study. They also tested it with the subject line, what if it were you? Subject line didn't have that much of a difference. But this imagine language led to higher gift rates and higher revenue. So if you're dealing with these type of experience goods where people aren't going to know what they're getting ahead of time, you can help them by asking them to imagine putting themselves in someone else's shoes, or to imagine a world that looks like the one you're trying to create. Our ever popular potpourri section. We are seeing significant jump ups in the case of confirmed cases of COVID in various places in Europe. We're also seeing it in Asia as well. My guess is that we're seeing it in a lot of countries. The Delta variant is proving out to be more contagious. So that's obviously the bad news. The good news is that the vaccines have been incredibly effective. So the Commonwealth Fund did a study of what deaths would have looked like with and without vaccinations. And they estimate that over 250,000 American lives have been saved by vaccinations. Also, recent data show that 99.5% of the people who are dying from COVID-19 right now are unvaccinated. And we know that fewer than 70% of Americans are vaccinated. So you have over 30% of the population who are accounting for 99.5% of the deaths from the disease. So this is my public service announcement. I'll hold up my COVID vaccine button. Now, I'm just some schmuck with a PowerPoint, so talk to your doctor about it if it's a good fit for you. But I've had COVID, I've had the vaccine, and I definitely prefer the vaccine. So that's my public service announcement for the day. And then this was too interesting not to share. You remember the Fukushima nuclear disaster. Well, there are radioactive hybrid terror pigs that are going around Fukushima right now. So there are over 160,000 humans that were displaced from the area around Fukushima. But these pigs started interbreeding, the boars started interbreeding with escaped domestic pigs and created this type of boar-pig hybrid that's living in the area around Fukushima. It's become, they say, cocky and aggressive and lost their natural kind of wariness of humans. They also contain up to 300 times the human safe dosage of cesium-137. Now, I am not sure exactly what cesium-137 is. My science classes are many, many years in the past, but I do know that anytime you get over 300 times the human safe dosage of anything, that's generally not a good thing. So officials are calling them highly radioactive and seemingly virtually indestructible. These hybrids are about 10% of the local pig population. And so now, as the restrictions are lifting around Fukushima, human authorities have been employing assassination teams of hunters to go and flush these radioactive hybrid terror pigs out of here. So we are seeing the plot of every Godzilla movie play out, but this time with pigs.